Can you say hard hats, folks? Hard hats, lunch pails, steel toe boots.
Anything short of a championship this year is a failure. Look at this boomer right here.
You've just got so much talent here.
Somebody said we need to apologize for Jaylen.
Can I call it John? What are we apologizing for? What did we say? What did we do? Hey, buddy Manny here. Welcome to a Wednesday edition of the Garden Report, we'll call it. We're going to drop this tomorrow after the Raptors and Celtics play for the second time. So we're coming off the first game. Samson Folk is here. I talked to him over at Raptors Republic about this upcoming Toronto season, which I don't know. That's kind of how I'm feeling about it after watching them the other night. Could look a little different once the full squad's intact. They didn't play everybody, but the bigger problem, Samson, is that the Celtics played nobody and built a 30-point lead in this game and pretty much ran Scottie Barnes, Jakob Poeltl, some of the other Raptors regulars off the court there in Boston and moved to 4-0. What were your impressions of the Celtics, even if it was the second unit, third unit Celtics?
So I think there was that piece that was written by Bleacher Report where they were kind of making an argument for why the Celtics wouldn't win. And they weren't saying that that's not going to happen, but they're saying if they lost the championship, this is what it would look like. And it was harping on a lack of depth. And then you watch them shellac everybody with their depth. You watch Payton Pritchard kind of come into his own as one of the better bench guards in the NBA. You look at, Sam Hauser, he didn't shoot well against the Raptors, but you watch him slide into the defense a little bit more confidently. His three-point shot is obviously a huge weapon to have. They have a bunch of guys off the bench who maybe if things go right, it turns out well. The Celtics look great. And you can't take for granted anything that their starting lineup can do. They're one of the most versatile defenses of the past however many years. They have a ton of fun offensive wrinkles from using Drew in the dunker spot to just some of their classic drive and kick stuff. They look awesome, man. The Celtics are impressive. And while, personally, I would like a different team to win the championship this year. It doesn't have to be the Raptors. I just like the parity. The Celtics, they look like they've quite rightly earned the favorites, I guess, totem pole.
Yeah, and I've thought about that question too. I got asked on the radio the other day, and when I'm going into this year, I'm like, all right, maybe the Porzingis injury will be more disruptive than it was a year ago. He would miss spurts. The playoffs is a little different because Horford's able to play, 30, 40 minutes a game to make up for his absence. So I'm like, all right, maybe that'll be a little more disruptive. Maybe there's that classic championship hangover. Guys are tired. Guys get hurt, stuff like that, coming off a long run. Some of the guys playing the Olympics, maybe there'll be that fatigue. And then the only other thing I thought about was everybody was so dedicated to their roles a year ago, doing all the things they need to do within that role, not playing with the outside of it, and trying to play more team basketball than individual basketball. Maybe that'll start to crumble just a little bit, whereas this team's not quite as dominant. And there's that depth question too that was there to some degree last year, but they answered it pretty convincingly. Pritchard was good last year. Hauser had a great year. Cornette, even played some playoff minutes for them. So you just go through all those boxes, and I'm always sitting there trying to say, like, oh, could a different threat emerge? Could this go wrong? Could that go wrong? Because you don't want to get caught off guard if it does. But I did that all last year, and they just never stopped rolling. Like, they pretty much were the best team in the NBA a year ago, start to finish. And I know it's just preseason. I know it's just a glimpse, but all the things we're seeing from them through the preseason so far doesn't look any different. This looks like the same team, and it pretty much is the same roster that raced to the finals a year ago, just picking the ball back up and doing what they did last year again.
It wasn't even so much a race to the finals. It was like a leisurely stroll. They found their place there and their way there, pretty easily. It is a very similar roster, but when you win the title with like that much resistance, which was not that much, and you have, stars in Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum who have really found their own. Jaylen Brown, I think, really becoming much better as a scorer over time, becoming more versatile as a playmaker. Jayson Tatum, while I think there's some playmaking limitations, his ability to rebound, to guard up, to fit like any role that's available to him is a very unique quality of a star. And then, of course, he's just going to sleepwalk to 30 points half the time while he's doing all that kind of stuff. And then, obviously, like Porzingis, Drew, Derek, like they have an unbelievable squad. And, yeah, it'd be tough to pick against them.
Where are you at on Tatum? You mentioned some playmaking limitations. I like the strides he made in that department last year, and I thought, during the finals, he pretty much beat the Mavs passing as much as he did scoring, probably more than given the shooting struggles he went through in the playoffs. He played 3 games to start this preseason, 42% from 3, or he might dip down to 40, but he's 40 plus so far this preseason, new form. And you go through all the things he did last year leading this team, and I actually feel like he came out of last year probably not as highly regarded as he should be given what he accomplished there. I know he went through a shooting lull, and there's still some areas of his game that could improve. I actually feel like his defense could reach another level going into this year and be in that all defense conversation. But, you handle both sides of the ball like a guy like that has to, and you got to balance your effort at both ends, I guess. But where are you at in terms of where he's at in the league hierarchy going into this year?
Yeah, I think if he had had a playoff series that he's used to having, a lot of people would be making the argument that he's a top 5 player in the NBA. He didn't have the best finals, and it doesn't really matter unless he really wanted the hardware. It doesn't really matter. The team won. And yeah. I still think it would be very hard to argue that Jaylen Brown is the best player on the team, to me. And it's okay if people want to argue that. I just wouldn't have much truck with it. I think he's the best player on the best team. If that puts him around like the Embiid level for people, if that puts him around the Giannis, Luka, SGA, Jokic level, whatever it ends up being, that's fine. He's probably a bit short of that for me, and he could have entered that conversation had he had like a tremendous finals. But I am, I know you mentioned the playmaking, like the drive and kick stuff has always been a strength, but I do want to see like a little bit more playmaking to the basket from him, a little bit more patience in the lane to create like better looks at the basket, to probe a little bit more, and some of that more, I guess, proactive playmaking rather than reactive. That would be a really big step that he's short of the next level guys at that. But of course, he's better defensively than a lot of the next level guys too. So these things equal out. And yeah, shooting slumps come and go for him, but he puts so much pressure on the rim. He's able to get to the line. He just is always churning, always doing positive things on the floor. And if he does take that next step defensively, I mean, things can look really good for him. He's a unique star in that sense, but he's a star, like all out. He's tremendous.
Yeah, he does everything, and that's the thing. Usually a player, even the best players in the league, Jokic, Giannis, they're not the best 3-point shooters. I think Tatum has them in that department. The defense is at a higher caliber than a lot of these stars, especially the guards.
Yep.
So he has it all. It's like he's a master of none of them, though. And he's, one of the higher level scorers in the league. But
yeah,
I don't know, will we see him win a scoring title during his career? Guess things could change in Boston down the line where has to do more of the scoring, and think he's probably capable of that down the line, but he's in a unique position on this team because it's so good, and he has to balance, doing everything himself with sharing the duties with Brown and, trusting his shooters and all that. So I guess the one thing I'm still caught up on a little bit, and, I was in that debate of does this team shoot too many threes? Is that a thing here? And I think for him specifically, it's interesting because he's had a great 3-point percentage through his career. I think he's like 37, 38. But now he's become this guy in this offense, and I understand it. They want to track pressure to him. They want to have double teams coming to him up at the top of the arc. They want to be able to pass out of that and, change the dimensions of the floor a little bit. But, man, he takes hard shots. Takes a lot of threes. And sometimes I'm just like, can you make it a little more difficult for him? You mentioned like probing in the lane a little bit. He's so strong. He looks like a power forward. In the modern sense, he's just gotten so ripped, and you saw him in the finals just barreling through players, going to the free throw line, doing that over and over and over again. And sometimes you're like, I get the math. I get the way you want to change the floor with him being that pull-up shooter, that step-back shooter, taking all those tough shots on the perimeter. But sometimes it feels like you'd make the game a little bit easier by getting him some looks close to the basket. And that's a balance I want to see them strike a little bit better for him this year, because there's games where he really struggles. He's taking tough shots. He's missing them. He's, 3 for 9, 3 for 10 to start the game. And you're like, oh man, this is weighing on him. And he handled it well in the playoffs and still did all the other little things. But I think this year they'll have to find that balance of, all right, let's utilize Tatum's skill to help everybody else, but let's also make the game easier for him sometimes.
Yeah, it's the salient point, the one you're making, where Tatum, the best players in the world, typically, Jokic does this, and it's where if things aren't going correctly for the team, you're the antidote to a shooting slump in game. Like Jayson Tatum, as you said, being able to bang around, looking like a power forward, he should be able to take a pinch post possession and like a sweep through, step through to the basket for free throws, for like 60% finishing. He should be able to do that all the time. And he should be able to go to that instead of like step back jump shots, instead of hard pull-ups, instead of like staying around the 3-point line. The Celtics are a team with so many good shooters on it that you can allow, if it ebbs and flows with them, fine. But not everybody on the team is able to get to the places on the floor that Tatum is available to. And his ability to kind of ratchet it up and ratchet it down is one of those game manager things that the best players of all time, which if Tatum turns it on in the back end of his career, his accolades will put him in like Hall of Fame status and all that kind of stuff, is kind of managing what your shot profile looks like, managing when you go to your shots. Some of this is like sports talk radio stuff, but there's definitely truth to it. Is like knowing when to insert yourself in the game, what that looks like, and when you can be the antidote to a shooting slump by kind of going inside more often.
Definitely. I want to give a quick shout out to Prize Picks here, our sponsor over at the Garden Report and CLNS Media, the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions in awarded winnings. Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all because you just got to pick more or less on 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks, and the best parts, it's just you against the numbers. It's injury free. It's daily fantasy, it's weekly fantasy if you're playing football here. Players go down, be able to build a new team next week. And the great part about Prize Picks is they have that injury insurance, so your lineup stays in play even if someone goes down in the first half. And right now you can get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Every Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineup. So again, pick more or less on different players' projections, yards, touchdowns, all the rest there. Basketball is coming up next week as well. There's an Anthony Edwards square coming out today that you'll hear more about over on Prize Picks social media channel. So go check that out. And again, use the code CLNS to get $50 instantly when you play $5. So let's go back to the game a little bit here. Samson, the depth guys we saw. I'm bummed you didn't get to see Cornette, who I've been really excited about this preseason. He's been starting for them in these games while they rest Horford. And I guess Horford's supposed to play tonight as we record this. So it'll be interesting to see which one of those guys starts and which comes off the bench, because there's been a little bit of a rumbling that Cornette could start for this team, give Horford some relief early on, maybe play double big off the bench with him and Tillman. Tillman's been great too, who didn't play in this game here. But you've mentioned Pritchard. The depth guys and the depth portion of this team, I feel like the biggest reason they won the East by 14 games last year are games like these where Pritchard's in there and all of a sudden he goes from being a guy who's off-ball shooting and filling a role a little bit to being a guy who in this game, I think he had 9 assists and 0 turnovers. He's creating his own shot. He's creating shots for others. Underrated defender too. I feel like Scottie gave him a little bit of trouble in this game when he got switched on to him, but holds his own, played against Luka in the finals. I know you're high on him coming out of this game and just from what you've seen over him over the last year or so here, but it really is amazing. I mean, this is a guy who was pretty buried on this roster a couple of years ago, and now no matter what level of a role you need him to rise to, it feels like he's capable of coming through every time. He's shooting 48% from 3 this preseason.
Yeah, and even if you go back to last year as a pick and roll ball handler, Pritchard was 1.137 points per possession. So per synergy, that categorizes him as excellent, 93rd percentile in the NBA.
Amazing.
Incredible. Yeah, I didn't want it to happen, but Payton Pritchard ended up being like a damn good guard, and I think Raptors fans had those, like the Pritchard hopes were for Malachi Flynn. It didn't
I was
shake
just
out
gonna
that
say
way.
that. Yeah. Was that the same draft too?
I think so, yeah. But Pritchard went, what, a couple picks earlier, I think?
Yeah, around the
Yeah.
end of the first round there.
But regardless, Pritchard, as you said, being an off-ball shooter, being a guy who relocates, being a guy who provides like ball pressure at the point of attack defensively, and a guy who's like pretty heady off-ball. Size matters a lot more off-ball than it does on-ball a lot of times, especially for point of attack defenders, but he does his best. But really, the fact is that it's not just the off-ball shooting. It's the fact that like the pull-up has come around. It's the fact that he can work through progressions as a pick-and-roll ball handler. If the dig comes, the spray to the wing is right there. If the tag man gets too deep, the spray to the corner is right there. He can hit the pocket pass. He can stop in the middle of the lane and see where things are happening. He can pull up if they're playing kind of like daisy defense underneath. He's good, man. And like obviously he has to contend with Drew Holiday, Derek White, Jaylen Brown. He's not going to find that starting lineup, but it's a hell of a thing to have that guy coming off the bench. He's been really, really impressive. And it wasn't, he's been killing the Raptors for years. Like every time he plays the Raptors, something goes off. And so it wasn't particularly surprising that that happened when they played on Sunday. If it happens tonight, I'm not going to be surprised either. And I'll probably have to ask a question about that to Darko. Like, hey, this keeps happening. Are you noticing anything in particular? But it's a fun thing to track. And it's no matter if they play for your team or otherwise, there's nothing more fun and interesting in the NBA than when players get better. And Pritchard is just steadily. I know they say linear progression isn't a thing, but it seems like he's been on it.
Yeah, and he signed an extension that pays him about $6 million for the next 3 years here. So Celtics have him locked up on one of the probably best value contracts in the NBA at this point. Another guy who they got at relatively low value here, in Exhibit 10, surprisingly, Lonnie Walker, goes off for 20 in that first game between Boston and Toronto here. Some questions about whether he'll make the roster. As I've said, I think a lot of it tax-based. They're in a really bad tax spot right now where, $2 million for Walker ends up becoming about $11 million in total with tax. So that might be where they have a little bit of pause. And he's been saying he's been willing to play in Maine a little bit to start the year. Maybe that allows them to buy some time and cut that salary down a little bit. I don't know what the whole situation is there, but in this game, showing off his shot creation, looking like a guy who should have an opportunity somewhere this year, whether it's Boston or elsewhere. And like I've tried to stress, there's the other parts of his game that I think probably have to develop a little bit of defense. No rebounds here, passing, not the best creator in the world, but he can create his own shot. You saw that in Brooklyn a year ago. It's an intriguing debate right now, among Celtics fans, whether you just try to fit him onto this roster because of how talented he is, and still a relatively young guy early in his career, or do you just say he's probably not going to play much anyway here, and so if he stays, he stays. If he goes, he goes.
That's who is he competing with for like a 15th spot, or who has to get cut in order for him to make the team? Do you reckon?
I mean, they could keep him if they just want to foot the bill for it. They have a 15th roster spot open.
Okay.
Some people are talking about Jaden Springer. He came over at the deadline a year ago, hit a couple of threes in that first game. His offensive game's super underdeveloped, but he's a high ranked defender analytically early in his career, and I think he's 22. I want to say, so he's still so young. He's on an expiring deal, about $4 million. It's all guaranteed, so maybe you could move off that if you wanted to keep him here. Walker's not two-way eligible, which kind of hurts too in terms of trying to squeeze him in here. But again, that 15 spot's open, so if you just want to pay $11 million just to have him on the roster, can you do much better at 15 than Lonnie Walker? I don't think so.
I think they pay him then. I think they'll foot the bill. Boston pays for stuff. Big sports town.
Yeah.
They'll make it work. I'm sure it'll shake out. He's a like. There have been many seasons where I'm doing, the off-season rigmarole of looking at, okay, who should the Raptors look at signing? Who's a good like mid-level exception guy? Who's a good biannual exception guy? And in all these conversations, Lonnie Walker comes up. And if you want to get him for the minimum, I mean, a lot of teams, I think, would take Lonnie Walker for the minimum. But Lonnie, obviously, there was mutual interest between he and the Celtics. And it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of guards in particular are interested in going to the Celtics to kind of recoup some of their value and be able to put themselves in a strong position, because you play in a
That's
really
exactly what he's
yeah,
doing.
you play in a really healthy defensive environment. You can be a little bit more aggressive as far as ball pressure. You won't get burned as much. You can look better there. You're going to get a lot of open shots playing off of those guys, because again, it's not just Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown that you're playing off of, but if you're playing that second unit with Payton Pritchard as a pick and roll ball handler, he's going to create looks for you. There's going to be opportunities. You're going to be staggered with Derek White and Drew Holiday and those types of guys. So there's a lot of opportunity. And Lonnie Walker, if this Celtics team is close to a dynasty, they've stayed together for so long to this point. If they just keep doing that, I think there'll be a lot of players like Lonnie Walker over the years who try and come in on that minimum and then hopefully bounce out of it with like $12 or $14 million the next year, something like that.
Yeah, and there's a good opportunity for him to do that this year, even if it requires spending a little time in Maine, which would be shocking to see, surprising to see. But he seems willing to do it. I talked to him, a week ago, 2 weeks ago when camp started, and he said, if that's what it comes to, I'll do it. So Celtics Raptors happening tonight. I do want to get into Toronto a little bit, but I want to shout out Game Time. If you're up in Toronto, want to see Celtics Raptors, or opening night even. Never too early to start looking ahead. Opening night, which is a tough ticket, ring night. Banner night at TD Garden against the Knicks, first game of the NBA season. It's a tough ticket, but if you're going to find it, it's on Game Time. Watch those prices fluctuate, and sometimes the best deals come right at or even a little bit after Game Time. Wouldn't recommend that on opening night, but sometimes that's the best way to get into the Garden, or some of these other venues. Concerts, great to wait up until about showtime, and you'll get good deals on those. And it's all available along with panoramic views of your seat and many deals, zone deals, flash deals, and all in pricing lets you know what you're going to be playing right from the start when you see the deals on the seats and on the map there. So download the app, create an account, use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. That's the Game Time app. Go over there and create an account. Again, code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So, Samson, as we said, we did a little collaboration over at Raptors Republic. And I think you asked me something to the effect of, what do you think of the Raptors coming into this year? And I'm like, I was actually thinking about it a couple of weeks ago, and I'm like, all right, they got Quickley, they got Barrett, Pirtle's still there, Olynyk. There's some talent here, and the East is pretty bad. They were in that mix for a while last year. They end up moving on from OG, Siakam, all these other guys. So, that effectively takes you out of that playoff race. But now, like, the Nets have given up. The Pistons are still rebuilding. You got all these teams at the bottom. Even the Hawks took a step back, moving DeJounte Murray, I felt like. So who's to say they won't be in that play-in race rather there? 10 seed, like, feels like there's enough talent here to take it. And then you start to see how the pieces actually fit together. And I know it wasn't a complete look at the team in that preseason game there, but just a lot of mismatched parts. Some younger guys like Grady and Mogbo, who I like. He was on my radar for the Celtics there. And I know Jacoby Walters hurt, and some of these other guys dealing with injuries, Bruce Brown. Barrett's hurt now, and he's still kind of in a flux in terms of what his role is going to be eventually in his career. Quickly here, is he like the point guard for this team, or is he just kind of an off-ball scorer? So there's talent here, but it's a lot of mismatched parts. And, the one thing I've learned covering this league for a little while now is, like, you look at a team with pieces and it's intriguing and you're like, oh, they could be good. But if there's mismatched parts and there's not really a vision, usually it ends up looking like that. And there's, just a lot of inconsistency. And who knows, maybe this team makes some more moves down the line here this year. So the more I see it, the more I start to think about it and actually hear them. Like, Darko called us a rebuild pregame the other day. And I know Pirtle had those training camp comments about, like, yeah, we're probably not trying to win the championship this year. So I don't know. I've kind of gone down in terms of what I'm projecting from this team this year. And I've liked what's gone on up there in Toronto over the years, but it's clearly a transition period right now.
Yeah. Anytime I've talked to Masai or Darko, they use the term rebuild. It's the players, like Jakob said the thing that most players won't say, but most players understand. Jakob was just candid about it. He was like,
right,
we're not winning the championship. Like, everybody knows. You don't have to play around with it, right? It's just honest. And obviously he got roasted a little bit, but I don't mind that at all. But however, the brass says rebuild. The players like Scottie and Emmanuel and RJ, if you ask them, they don't agree. And that's good. You want the front office to be future thinking, to be planning out in steps, and you want the players to care deeply and want to win every single night. That's the proper dynamic to have. And as far as like the fit, I mean, yeah, RJ offensively really found his fit. He averaged 22 points, 6 rebounds, 4 assists on 61% true shooting. As a Raptor, he was cutting 3 times as much as a Raptor. He was passing on his drive significantly better. He shot the ball better, but he also shot like he ran out in transition. He shot 53% in the half court. He was really great. Now defensively, he's not a strong player defensively, and Emmanuel Quickley didn't have a strong start either. So their backcourt is maybe a little bit in flux there. And as far as figuring out the offense, it's pretty egalitarian. They rely on the structure of it quite a bit. They run a lot of high-low stuff. They run a lot of horns. They run a lot of elbow sets, and they run just straight up pick and roll with, Scottie, but they shallow a lot of the double drag cuts. They're running very specific floor balance with weak side exchanges to make sure like you have to be very specific about the spacing to maximize this. But Scottie was an 80th percentile pick and roll ball handler last year. They were figuring things out, but the defense sucked. So they sorted out a lot of what they wanted to do offensively, but the defense wasn't strong. And there's not much on the roster that indicates that that's going to be that much better to me. And as you say, they have good players. And not only that, the good players are here and they've been paid. Emmanuel Quickley is on $35 million a year. RJ Barrett is around 26. Scottie Barnes, it's 11 this year, but it jumps up to a max contract the next year. Jakob Poeltl is on 20. Even Kelly Olynyk is on like 13. Chris Boucher is on 11 or 10 and a half. This team is not like light on the budget. They've paid their guys. They are more talented than the bottom end of the Eastern Conference. I don't think they could escape the play-in like competition if they wanted to, because you have to be better than
trade some more guys. Yeah,
exactly. And then even then, it's like you got to be worse than a lot of teams that are super interested in being bad. They'll be around. They're a good enough team to be around. Their starting lineup won a lot of minutes last season. They were a good starting lineup. Their bench looks like people worry about the Celtics bench. The Raptors bench is a bench to worry about, I think. They'll win some games, but jumping into like the top 8, I'd be very impressed. I think that's like an all NBA turn for Scottie, plus maybe like close to an all-star turn for one of the other guys, right? I think that's contributions down the line, and I don't know if they're there right now. But as you said, like mismatched pieces, they'll have a year to see how much of it fits. The Raptors, they reserve the right to pivot at any time, and that's 100% what the front office has in mind. That they've paid the guys, they'll have an opportunity, but they can pivot.
Yeah, and I think back to when we talk about Scottie, the game right before New Year's last year in Boston, he comes out, shoots a ton of threes, ended up shooting 7 for 15 from 3, and took a step in that department last year. It was at 34 or so for the season, so nothing lights out from 3 there, but a real step above where he was the year before, which is a little step back in that area. And I think for him, a good place to be, the mid-30s there. And I love his game. I think he does a little bit of everything. The defense is obviously the rock there, and we'll see what he becomes offensively in his prime. But I do sometimes watch him on that end, as we talked about in our discussion, and just feel a little bit underwhelmed about him as a hub. And, he can pass. He's long. He'll be around the rim just creating opportunities for himself and others. But there's always that thing with an inconsistent jump shot guy like him where, maybe the defense is backing off him a little bit, or, there's just that offensive creation for himself that I think has to reach another level for him to be one of the stars of the league. Like, you mentioned the extension there. He's going to get that bump if he makes all NBA. And I can't imagine a scenario. And part of it's, where he's at, but part of it's the talent in the league right now where he's really not close to that all NBA caliber right now. And again, this is going to be his 23-year-old season, 4th year in the league. So I don't want to sit here and be down on him because there's still 2 or 3 years of real growth here. And this is finally his team where he's probably going to have the ball in his hands a ton, be able to make mistakes, be able to go through what Brown and Tatum went through about 3-4 years ago now. So I'm a little captivated by him because I feel like right now where we stand today, his game on the offensive end underwhelms me a little bit. But there is a lot to like here, and there's a lot of opportunity ahead for him to grow on what he's already done. And last year was another step for him in a transition period for this team. I just wonder what it'll look like, in your vision of what he'll become once he reaches that full form in, 3-4 years from now.
I wrote this big piece in his rookie year where I was saying it seemed to me that like Scottie is going to be a star, but he's going to be quite a unique one. RJ Barrett called him the most unselfish star he's ever played with. Maybe that's tinted somewhat by playing in New York and how like the Knicks played. But that's also Scottie to my eye. And I've tracked a lot of his career, and that's a lot of my most popular work is those super big deep dives on Scottie. And I've done them on other players as well. In my estimation, he's one of the best passers in the NBA. I track something called advantage assists, which is assists where you deliver really high value, easy baskets to other people. So it's like imagine gifting somebody a layup because you drove the lane and you drew 2 to the ball. A layup is a lot more valuable than point to wing pass for a 3-point attempt. Even if it doesn't look the same, one requires a lot more creation from the player. Scottie is like a big time advantage assist guy. He draws a lot of attention. He creates a lot of gravity, and he makes a lot of great passes to his teammates. Now, the All-NBA stuff, I mean, you just have to be on a good team to make All-NBA. The Raptors don't look like they're going to be a great team. Scottie, as you mentioned, sometimes he can underwhelm offensively. You watched the game the other night. He was a passenger for it. He didn't.
I know you didn't even notice him out there at the start.
Yeah, it was his second game in 7 months since he broke his hand. It's the preseason. I mean, the Blazers waxed the Kings the other night, right? There's this kind of stuff happens. I expect him to be very good this season, and probably as far as like impact performance. However good the Raptors are, I expect Scottie to put himself in, for his part, third team All NBA conversations maybe, but the Raptors won't be good enough for it. I think he can be that type of player. If not this year, then the next. Good enough to justify anything he's being paid. Good enough to justify being 1 or 2 of the best players on a really good team. The team building just has to catch up around him. And we'll see how that shakes out. But there's lots of stuff. As you say, you're captivated by him. There's lots of stuff to like about Scottie.
Where do Quickley and Barrett fit in next to him then? And who knows? It's going to be a long window to this team becoming what it's eventually going to be. So who knows if those guys are even part of that. It's just, for now, a return on OG, and a pretty good one at that, especially with RJ expanding his game like he did last year. And Quickley, I think, is a guy I like who, with more opportunity, I think can flash. And the best part about him is he'll be able to most comfortably, of all these 3 guys we talk about here, play off the ball, create out of a secondary role, maybe even a bench role eventually again. But right now, probably going to be a starter for this team. How do those 2 guys fit in next to Barnes in the short and long term, you think?
Yeah, I think actually probably I consider RJ maybe a bit better player than Emmanuel right now. As crazy as that might sound, I think that is how I feel currently. But Emmanuel is just such an easy fit. Like he did a pretty good job of expanding his playmaking once he got to Toronto. He got a lot more possessions to work around with, to try things out as a lead guard. And the assists popped up, but the assist percentage was still, and assist to usage stuff didn't go crazy. He did struggle in the middle of the floor, but he shot the 3-ball well because he always shoots the 3-ball well. He is very capable as a mover off the ball. If the Raptors want to run actions with Scottie on ball, IQ has always been a strong mover. Unfortunately, so far the two-man actions between IQ and Scottie haven't worked well because IQ isn't a strong enough screener to create anything interesting, and Scottie didn't score on the switches that they generated very well. And then also Scottie isn't super invested in being a screener for Emmanuel like Emmanuel has in Jakob Poeltl, who's able to clear space, make it easier for him to work. They have to work on their two-man game, but the idea of their skill sets mesh very well. In fact, there's a behind-the-scenes phone call of when they made the trade of Masai raving about the fit between IQ and Scottie. So I think they believe in that. That's something there. I mean, they paid both of them and they unveiled them both at the same press conference. They seem close. They've vacationed together for basketball, that kind of stuff. And RJ offensively, he's been really no frills. I mean, he did the 22, 6, and 4 on 61% true shooting with the same amount of touches per game as Kelly Olynyk. He really was no frills. It was like really limiting how many dribbles he used, being more direct in how he drives, being more decisive in how he's deciding between the drive and the shot, making better reads on the ball for a pass or a play to the rim. That kind of stuff was great. The tough thing is like Scottie is best as a kind of a power forward backline defender, a sweeper role, if you will, on defense. And RJ is a guy who doesn't really have a role defensively. So the Raptors are a little bit without a wing defender right now. And I mean, you watch the Celtics, you know how important that role is. It's a super big deal for good teams. So they're in a really strange spot. And those guys will be given an opportunity to see how much they can make stick, and how much they make stick depends or is what determines, you know, how much of them stay and what the team looks like in the future.
So anyone we haven't mentioned on this roster so far this year that you feel like could surprise, stand out, take a step?
Grady is going to shoot a lot of threes this year, I think. And he did
in that game.
Yeah, he looked really bad defensively. They just changed his closeout method. Like the sprint and jump stop method is what they teach now at the higher levels of basketball. And I think it's the better way to close out. But they were teaching him like the stutter step, chop step closeout last season. So they're changing things on the fly for him. And he really struggled, in particular against Boston, at the sprint stop closeout. He got lost in the corner like 4 times, overshooting his closeouts, and he got beat in isolation. So things don't look positive for defense yet. He has to put on more weight, get stronger, not be as much of a turnstile. But he's going to shoot the ball, and I'm excited to watch him shoot the ball. It should be good.
Yeah, it's definitely a different Raptors team than we remember watching over the last handful of years here. And when we started the show, it was that bubble year, these two teams going at it, and
what a series, man.
It was a great series, and we had a lot of Raptors fans in the chat, and we were going back and forth. It was a fun time. So part of me is a little bummed that Raptors might be fading for a few years here and going into that rebuild period, but there's some good pieces here, and you got that centerpiece in Scottie who will hopefully pan out here, and if that works out, they'll probably be back faster than we think. So everybody can check out all your work over at Raptors Republic, right? Anything else you want to shout out?
No, that's it. Just thanks for having me on, Bobby.
Yeah, great to finally have you on. And as I said earlier, we did a bit of a collaborative piece talking about a little Celtics, mostly Raptors over there at Raptors Republic. To go check that out. Go show our sponsors some love. As I mentioned, Prize Picks. Use that code CLNS for $50 when you play $5. And Game Time, CLNS, code CLNS gets you $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. We will be back with more coverage of practice later this week, Thursday and Friday, I believe. They're going to be at it again after this Toronto game to wrap up the preseason. And then opening night, Tuesday, Celtics, Knicks at TD Garden. They're going to raise the banner, hand out the rings, do that whole thing. Thanks, Samson. Hopefully we'll talk to you later this year.
See ya.
Wait, Ahmed's got an outro for us, I think.
No, he doesn't.
He said he was going to work on an outro.
He had a phenomenal game.
Phenomenal game.
Forfeit's out. I think it's an auction. That did not sound like a chair.
It was a freaking chair. It does sound like a chair. Wait, Yaman's got an outro for us, I think.
No, he doesn't.
He said he was going to work on an outro.
He had a phenomenal game.
Phenomenal.
Forfeit's out. I think it's an auction. That did not sound like a chair.
It was a freaking chair. It does sound like a chair.